we're going to take a little bit of a step back from technique and talk about modern fusion players. To me, a lot of modern fusion players sound like they have come from rock or prog rock first and then kind of got into jazz, and now they're modern fusion players, and maybe that's the sound of modern fusion. Do you think that modern fusion has become very jazz light?
Yes, without a doubt. I mean, in some ways, I would feel partly responsible for this, although I had a jazz education first. I did a jazz degree. So I don't think you could argue this is sort of the case for the stuff I do now, where I've fallen into a kind of lane, if you like, that I'm quite happy with. Now I wouldn't call myself a jazz musician, although I would go and do a jazz gig, and I think I do okay. And I used to be a hardcore, like badge wearing jazz. I won't use the phrase, but like goose stepping jazzer. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And that was my thing for years. And I had a 175, and was I played through a polytone. That was the
Oh,
thing.
wow.
Yeah, full on. So I had that education, and I do have quite a lot of jazz vocabulary in my playing, but there is a definite YouTube Dorian fusion thing going on where I think, and again, I don't mean to offend anybody. This is just a thing. It's fine. It's a thing. It's a genre. It's where it's ended up. It's not that it's work. I mean, some people might think it's worse. That's fine. Everyone has their opinion and taste in music. But I think there's quite a lot of fusion players out there who, if you stuck something, I don't know, like trying to think of a relevant stuff. Well, even something simple like All the Things You Are, or if you stuck like some Bill Evans tunes from like very early, for example, any of those kind of tunes, Time Remembered, whatever, Anna Maria, for example, more complex tunes that have got proper changes in and require a good chunk of melodic mind.
Yeah, it seems right, right. I mean, I'm not criticizing. It's just something that seems very evident from an oral perspective that rhythmically and um, I want to say harmonically, but I don't mean to make it sound like the depth of harmonic the depth of the harmonic presentation doesn't have to be so deep. I don't know. Maybe it is coming from a rhythmic perspective that's missing. That seems like it's not associated with jazz at all. So you do hear the line, you do hear a melodic minor thing, but you immediately know probably didn't listen to much jazz, and not that that's bad, but it's just has modern fusion become modern fusion light? If we look back just 10 or 15 years and look at what fusion players were spitting out, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably right. I mean, the, there's a lot of players out there who've definitely come from more of a rock background, and that probably is from, if you take your Greg Howe style fusion. Now, Greg, I don't think he would say himself is not a guy who would want to play over very early or 26-2 or giant steps. I mean, he did a version of giant steps, and the solo section was over like a 7-sharp 9 chord, I think, as opposed to the changes.
Yeah.
In no way am I suggesting that he's not capable of it or whatever. It's just not part of his style. It's not what he does, and he does play over changes. There's plenty of melodic minor harmony in there, but it's not from it's like you were saying, it's not from a jazz tradition. Now, my opinion on this stuff is that all fusion players who play over changes would do very well for their time feel and for their kind of phrasing generally, especially in terms of adding chromaticism into their playing and having chord tones line up on strong beats, to do a fair old chunk of studying jazz language. But of course, it's not necessary. I mean, if all you want to do is play over Dorian chords, that's cool.
Yeah,
and you can call yourself
Dorian
a
away.
fusion player, but yeah, exactly. It's fine. But I do agree with what you're saying. I get what you're saying completely. I do
Okay,
wonder
so
whether I get charged with that sometimes, but I can assure everybody I did a proper jazz degree.
Do you? Okay, I'll ask you the one school question. Do you think that do you think school hurt your playing at all or helped your playing?
For me personally, it didn't hurt my playing. I know other people who well, in some cases, devastated their playing because they didn't get on with the competitive environment. As I say, I was a proper goose stepper, so I was fully into the competitive environment, embraced it, and all I cared about was being. I wanted to be Kurt Rosenwinkel. I wanted to be Pat Metheny first,
Hmm.
and then I wanted to be Kurt Rosenwinkel, and that was my life for 4 years. So in my case, it didn't hurt my playing. What I would say is I definitely didn't come out of jazz school, having done a jazz degree, as a great jazz musician. That's something that I think is very rare.
Yeah.
I didn't go in as a good jazz musician. I went in as a shredder with lots and lots of harmonic knowledge that I couldn't really apply, and came out as a pretty decent jazzer, but not a great jazzer. Um, but it certainly didn't hurt my playing. I think I came out very inspired and hungry for more.
Oh,
And
nice, nice.
that's where I ended up. But as I say, I know people who it totally destroyed their love of music. So it can go either way.
Yeah,
What was your experience?
yeah.
Did you go to jazz school?
Did I go? Not only did I go, I spent 20 years. I've been in school since I've been in school as a professor. I went to University of Miami, not infamous, the famous University of Miami school, and I was there during a time when it was just unbelievable. When I got there, it seemed like everybody was a pro player, and I wasn't. I was far from it. And then after that, I ended up teaching there, and then I taught there for 17 years. So and now I teach at another university now. So I've been in the ivory tower, my entire professional life.
So have you seen both sides of that? And then have you seen, I mean, obviously you've seen people who thrive entirely on that whole process. And
That's a very good question. I've seen people thrive, and then I've seen people thrive and then just not do music for a living, become a lawyer, and then become a yoga teacher, and then become a lawyer again, and still plays guitar. Actually, I've seen people who totally had a hard time, and then ended up writing for Beyonce and Rihanna. I've seen people that were incredibly amazing jazz musicians and become public school teachers. I've seen just like a myriad that like that game that I don't know if it's maybe a game that you'd see in a carnival where you flick, the ball goes up a track and it's all these pins and the ball like kind of bounces. You don't know where it's going to go. That's what it seems like. The school experience is good for a lot of people, not good for some people. And then afterwards, you don't know where they're going to go. And I think that sometimes for people who have a raw, unfettered talent, I would be very hesitant to say, hey, you need to go to school. I would say everything you need that you want to learn, aside from the social thing, that's the main thing that you won't have if you don't go to school.
yeah,
For a person like that, I would say, I don't know about the school thing. You might be nice in the beginning, but then you might grind afterwards.
I think jazz is a funny one as well because by its nature, it's a highly elitist art form, and that sounds negative from an outside perspective. To say something is elitist sounds bad, but of course, it has to be elitist because it's a high art form by its nature. So I think one of the problems that certainly I experienced with this, and I think a lot of people experience, is if you are very good, that isn't good enough, because what you find is that the goal, or the perceived goal when you go to jazz colleges, you want to be Chris Potter or Adam Rogers or Jonathan Kreisberg or the next, whoever it is, the next Wayne Krantz, or whoever the famous guys are in the guitar world. It's your Osnoys, your Wayne Krantzes. Ben Unson is an up and coming guy who's absolutely, these guys are the way I always the analogy I always use is they're like astrophysicists, people working at CERN. there's very few people that graduate from MIT or from, an astrophysics or a physics degree that go and work at CERN. Only the cream of the crop do that. And it's the same thing with the New York's jazz scene. Realistically, what does everybody want to do? Nobody who graduates from a jazz degree, when they first started, envisaged themselves playing in a bar, doing jazz standards twice a week with a trio, in their hometown or even in a big city. What they envisaged was playing, at the Blue Note or the 55 bar or Smalls or wherever. That was the dream when I was, 20 or whatever, 19, 20. But of course, to achieve that is pretty much, you're talking your upper tiny percentage of, people who pick up the instrument. So the funny thing is the guitar has now reached this point that saxophone reached 2 decades before, where you had your Michael Breckers, your Bob Bergs, your Bob Mintzers, whoever, Chris Potters, as the next sort of generation, Joshua Redman, Branford Marsalis, whoever, where the level suddenly shot up to be this insane, like, how the hell is that even possible?
Yep.
And guitar has gone through that same transformation in that, because Pat Metheny, John Scofield, there are a bunch of people out there who can play like Pat Metheny and John Scofield now. Not exactly the same, obviously. They're the innovators and the originators of that style. Mm-hmm. But, the absolute cutting edge now, your Kreisbergs, your Rosenwinkels, your Ben Unsons, whatever, these guys are so insanely ridiculous at what they do and so innovative and so high level that it's such a hard thing to aim for. And I think most people who study jazz, and I'm very happy to be corrected on this, so please in the comments flame me if this is not the case. But I think most jazz musicians have a level of disappointment in what they are able to achieve if they're not that upper tiny percentage of ability level. Certainly that was what it was for me, which I think is why I ended up going in a fusion direction. Not that was an excuse for not being good enough at jazz. It's just that there is a point where I think it's healthy to realize what you are capable of in a particular style, in a particular genre. So I'm a good jazz guitarist, but I'm much better at what I do than that thing. So I would eternally be a frustrated jazz guitarist. I'm not frustrated with what I do now, if that makes sense.
Right, it makes sense to me. I think it makes sense to everybody, actually. You forgot the massive disappointment when you see how much you get paid for a night at the 55.
Yeah, right. That's very true.
I don't know.
Absolutely.
A lot of your fans, in their own minds have easily elevated you to guitar god status. And so to prove that you're more human than just the, man guitar god Thor thing, what is something that is like just giving you the biggest problem on guitar besides the guitar?
Okay. Well, first of all, I have a big problem with memory. So one of the things that can be a big problem for me is if I'm in a room. So I've very many times sat in a room with Josh Smith, Mark Lettieri, some of the guys we mentioned before, Isaiah Sharkey, and they're like, "Oh, should we play this tune?" And I'm like, "Has anyone got a chart for it? Because I'll be fine if you give me the chart." And I know a bunch of standards. I'm not talking about that per se, but I don't have a big repertoire of tunes that I can play. Yeah. So I cannot sit in front of an audience and do a solo guitar gig. That is my absolute nightmare. I think that's a nightmare for most guitar players.
So did you see the Ben Lacey interview I did?
Of course.
The part on the Ben Lacey interview where I said, "Ben, there's something I got to tell you. You can do what is one of my biggest fears that I would be asked to do. If you go through TSA or wherever, the airport security, and they see you've got that guitar bag, and they're like, 'Mr. Quayle, oh, what's in that bag?' And you're like, 'It's a guitar.' And they're like, 'Really? Take it out and play us something.'"
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing that really amazed me about what Ben was doing as well, before I talk about that, is that you were saying to him, What's something that you could do that's like somebody could start with that's kind of a good entry point to this? And he plays the sickest thing you've ever heard. And you're like, yeah, but what would they do to start with? Well, that seems like an easy place to start. It's like, yeah, I mean, I've sat down with Ben. There's a video of me playing with Ben on YouTube, and I am trying for dear life to stay relevant in a place where you are totally irrelevant, because it's that thing of, I have these kind of nightmares that sometimes someone will find out you're a guitar player. In fact, I was at a friend of mine's house in Romford down in London the other day, which I wasn't supposed to be, but we were doing business stuff. We were genuinely doing business stuff. And his wife said, so you're a guitar player. What kind of music do you play? And I was like, oh no, this is an awkward conversation anyway, because I've now got to explain what it is that I do to somebody who doesn't listen, to doesn't have any idea of any of the words I'm about to use.
Yeah.
But then a guitar was given to me, and you're like, okay, what am I going to play? Because, like, do I sit there and play something like, and start improvising around "Isn't She Lovely" or something, because they'll surely know that chord progression.
Yeah.
But I can't do that and play the melody at the same time and play the bass line. So they're probably not going to recognize it anyway. And as soon as I start, it's like they've lost interest immediately. So I am fully aware that my guitar playing is for guitar players. And I've come to terms and I'm at peace with that. Not many years ago, but a good 5, 6, 7 years ago. And that's fine. And friends of mine, like, do you know who John Gomez is?
Yes.
So John is one of my best buddies. I've known John for about 20 years.
Amazing player.
He's ridiculous. We hang out quite a lot, and our daughters are exactly the same age. They're best buddies as well. John could sit in front of a room of non-guitar players, play his insane stuff and sing his songs, and entertain a room for 3 hours. The idea of me entertaining a room of non-guitar players for more than 5 minutes is probably impossible. But that's just the nature of my playing. So if you were to ask me what there are all sorts of technical things that I struggle with, but they're irrelevant to the style of music and the style of playing that I do. So I don't worry too much about them. I used to. But the thing that, one of my biggest regrets, if you like, is not having a repertoire of things that are relevant outside of my particular sphere, because you do find yourself having to play in front of people who don't have the prerequisite understanding of what you do in order to appreciate it. And that's kind of sad, because music is for everybody.